Good morning. This is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you from Montreal, Canada for Reason to Resist on October 31st, 2025. Today, we'll speak with a Palestinian solidarity activist in the United Kingdom who's being prosecuted under Britain's heinous anti-terror legislation, something about which we've talked at length on Reason to Resist. But before I bring our guest into the discussion, I wanted to share with our audience some sad news that my family has just received. 7 years ago or so, my family began to sponsor a child in Gaza, and his name is Hamada Arafat. And here's a photo of Hamada and his mother taken several years ago. Our family sponsored Hamada through a wonderful organization based in Montreal, the Canadian Palestinian Foundation of Quebec, or CPFQ. And over the years, we received many kind letters from Hamada's family. In 2018, for example, his father wrote to us as follows: "My brother's sponsor, in my name, the father of your sponsored child with special need, and in the name of all my family from the youngest to the eldest, we raise our hands, praying God to give you health, wellness, and satisfaction. My brother's sponsor, I testify that there is no God but the one God, and that you and the people like you deserve all our gratitude, but we have nothing to offer other than this letter to thank you. I'm writing this letter and will be traveling today to Jerusalem with my other sick son to get his treatment at the hospital." The following year, Hamada's mother, Samar, wrote to us as well, stating, "In my name, Samar Fakri, and in the name of my son Hamada that you kindly sponsor, we are both thankful for your sponsorship and use the money to sustain our family of 13 members, 3 of whom are handicapped, and the father is sick. I'm the one taking care of them all. 5 children go to school. May God accept your good deeds and protect you and your family from all harm." After Israel's genocide began in October 2023, we became quite worried, naturally, about Hamada and his family. And last year, we reached out to CPFQ to inquire about their safety. It took some time for CPFQ to locate Hamada's family, which is entirely understandable. In fact, we were pleasantly surprised that they were able to do so. And in November 2024, CPFQ confirmed to us that an NGO had located Hamada on the ground in Gaza. We heard nothing further about Hamada until October 29th, 2 days ago. On that day, CPFQ wrote to us as follows: "We are deeply saddened to inform you that we have received an update from the NGO and that your sponsored child, Hamada Arafat, has passed away and is remembered among the martyrs. May God bless his soul." Upon receiving this heartbreaking news, I asked CPFQ to tell us, if it could, how Hamada had passed away. So far, we've not received a response. But I note that within the 24-hour period preceding our receipt of this news, Israel's genocide forces massacred more than 100 Palestinians in Gaza, including at least 46 children. At this stage, we don't know whether Hamada was killed in one of those airstrikes, but if we're able to make that determination, we'll surely share that news with you. Needless to say, we're greatly saddened by Hamada's passing and send to his family our profoundest condolences, and may his memory be eternal. With that, I'd like to turn to our guest from the United Kingdom. Free speech is under relentless assault there and throughout the West. And this is something, as I say, we've had no shortage of comment to offer upon. And the guest who graciously joins us today is a person of conscience whom the British government is seeking to silence through its deeply repressive anti-terror legislation. Her name is Sarah. Sarah is a philosophy, politics, and economics student at the University of London School of African and Oriental Studies. That, by the way, is the same university where Professor Kostas Lapavitsas, a frequent guest in our program, lectures. Sarah is being prosecuted under Britain's anti-terror legislation. On March 4th, 2025, British authorities charged her under Section 12 of the UK Terrorism Act 2000 for allegedly, quote, "inviting support for a proscribed organization," close quote. The organization in question being, I believe, Hamas. And this was as a result of remarks she made in the first days of Israel's genocidal assault on Gaza in October 2023. Thank you very much for joining us today, Sarah.
Thank you.
So before we begin, Sarah, just to give our audience the legal context, I'd like to show them Section 12 of the anti-terror legislation of 2000, walk them through it, and then invite you to comment.
Yeah.
So you'll see here at the top, Section 1, a person commits an offense if he invites support for a prescribed organization, and the support is not or is not restricted to the provision of money or other property. And then it says in 1A, this I understand is a recent amendment to this legislation. A person commits an offense if the person expresses an opinion or belief that is supportive of a prescribed organization, and B, in doing so is reckless as to whether a person to whom the expression is directed will be encouraged to support a prescribed organization. And then just going down to the bottom here, a person guilty of an offense, this is Section 6 at the bottom, a person guilty of an offense under this section shall be liable on conviction, on indictment, to imprisonment for a term not exceeding 14 years. I repeat, 14 years, to a fine as well, or to both, and on summary conviction to a term of imprisonment not exceeding 6 months. So just to, before we get into these provisions, Sarah, you've been charged on indictment or on a summary basis?
I'm actually not entirely sure, but on indictment, yeah.
So yeah, so your understanding, please correct me if I'm wrong, is that you are exposed in this prosecution to a term, assuming that a conviction is entered, that would be up to 14 years. Is that correct?
Yeah. The prosecution could ask for 14 years of prison time.
Okay. So just before I invite you to comment, I want to clarify one thing about this. This is something that a lot of you, it's not just me, a lot of experts in civil liberties and human rights have been saying this for some time, and a number of them, including me, have been arguing that we should just abolish altogether this anti-terror legislation and the whole concept of designating some organizations as terrorist or not. And we can get into that if you'd like, Sarah, but I just want to highlight one aspect of this, and that is there is no due process involved at all in a government determining whether or not an entity is a terrorist organization. Basically, they can do it without any kind of a trial, without any public input, and they can do it on the basis of secret evidence they never shared with us, or no evidence at all. And once they've done this thing that nobody has been afforded an opportunity to challenge publicly, because of this legislation, anyone who comes along and then tries to challenge it, right, who says, wait a second, we don't agree that this is a terrorist organization. Well, that could easily be construed as support for the organization, and you go to jail for up to 14 damn years because you contested this thing that the government did without any due process. I mean, I just find this mind-boggling that we put up with this. But anyway, Sarah, I invite you now to comment on this legislation and any aspect of it you think is worthy of comment.
Yeah, well, first, it's like incredibly broad. So, what is an expression or belief that's supportive of a prescribed organization? That could be really anything, depending on who you ask. In my case, I've never publicly or even privately spoken about any prescribed organizations here in Britain. And yet I've been charged under this act. So sometimes it can get to really, really small, minute things. Speaking about Palestinian resistance in a general sense can get you arrested and charged under Section 12 of the Terrorism Act. And obviously, it gives really broad powers to the police to detain you for longer amounts of time, to keep you on bail for longer amounts of time, to have more restrictive bail conditions, and so on and so on. And one of the basic kind of provisions of the Terrorism Act 2000 is that organizations which are prescribed under it have the right to apply, to go through the legal process of being deprescribed. And so Hamas has done that in the past year. And one of the lawyers who worked on the case, Fahad Ansari, recently was stopped at an airport, detained, had his devices seized, and now it was ruled that information which was on his devices, which was legally privileged information between Fahad Ansari and his clients, could be looked at basically by the justice system and used as evidence against him in this case, which is, violating some really kind of basic principles of the law here in Britain, and no one is nearly as horrified as they should be. And this is what this legislation does, is it's there to target, kind of in a really broad sense, anyone who challenges the state in any kind of way. And even before the Terrorism Act 2000, the kind of precursor to it, the Prevention of Terrorism Act, which was more so targeted towards the Irish liberation struggle and basically making illegal support for Irish liberation, that really set the groundwork for what the Terrorism Act 2000 would be in terms of wanting to prescribe and make illegal any support for groups, national liberation struggles, which challenged British imperialism, British state interests, and so on. And it's really important that when we do the work of fighting against state repression, that we mention this act, that we mention terrorism legislation as being inherently racist and in the way it's designed, attacking the people who are out in the streets fighting for Palestine, fighting for the Kurds, fighting for Kashmir, and so on. There's no real terrorists and then fake terrorists. Everybody who's being targeted under this act, as long as it exists, will have been people fighting back against, the British sponsorship of genocide in Gaza.
Yeah, I mean, this legislation really strikes me as a prescription for tyranny. I don't think it's any exaggeration at all to describe it that way. And if they continuously push the boundaries of this legislation outward, we're going to find ourselves in a really bad place. Not just people who support Palestine, but anybody who potentially engages in any form of legitimate dissent will be at risk. Now, before we get into what happened to you specifically, could you take a couple of minutes and just tell us about your background?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm an international student from France. I actually just graduated from SOAS back in September, but I'm doing a master's now. I've been politically active for a few years now. All of my family, most of my family lives in France, but I've got family kind of dotted around the world, coming from an immigrant background myself, being French and Ethiopian. So that's kind of my background. And then I came to Britain to study at SOAS because of its kind of decolonial credentials, and mostly because of how open it was to the global south and perspectives from the global south. I was really not interested in doing kind of politics and economics and then just looking at Europe and North America. That was not my cup of tea.
And so could you please tell us, Sarah, exactly what it is you said that caused the speech Gestapo to come after you?
Yeah, so it was back in October 2023. So a few days after the 7th of October, I delivered a speech, I have to say allegedly, outside of my university, SOAS. The university has a long track record of students standing with the Palestinian people. There's for a very long time been a Center for Palestine Studies, a Palestine Student Society, and so on. So it's a student body which is already really politically active on that question. I spoke at this demonstration, and I started my speech by saying that we support the Palestinian resistance. We support the right of the Palestinians to resist against occupation, against genocide, and that includes armed struggle. And the people of Gaza have broken free from what is an open-air prison. And this is speech which is completely protected by international law, which grants the Palestinian people and all occupied peoples the right to resist under occupation. And then I went on and made a speech about the complicity of the British state and the need to, in fighting Zionism at home, we need to fight British imperialism. is really what needs to happen, and we need to put some demands towards the British state and those who are in charge. We can't just say we stand in solidarity with the Palestinians. We need to fight those who here in Britain are funding genocide and the destruction of the Palestinian people.
Yeah, you described it as an open-air prison. I just note in passing that so too did David Cameron, the former British Prime Minister, when he was Prime Minister in 2010, called Gaza an open prison. And, it's been a constant theme on our program that oppressed and occupied peoples do have a right to armed resistance within the boundaries of the laws of war, of course, but nonetheless, they have that right. That's something that our racist corporate media consistently ignore in their coverage of this genocide. So could you tell us, Sarah, what happened to you at that very moment when you were arrested? And I also understand that another student of SOAS was arrested. If you can also tell us what happened to that student, who is that student, and what's the status of the charges against that student?
Yeah, absolutely. So actually, I was arrested several months after my alleged offense. It took around 4 months because I was filmed while speaking, and then that video was circulated in Zionist circles on Twitter. UK Lawyers for Israel, which is a known Zionist organization, basically handed the Met Police a case against me with the video and different legal arguments about, how you could arrest and prosecute me, which is, what organizations like UK Lawyers for Israel do all the time, is they're doing the police's work of finding evidence against people and then building cases against them, doxing them on social media and so on. And so in January 2024, 7 police officers showed up at my flat at around 7 a.m., raided my flat. So my devices were seized, my kafia was seized, political literature was taken, whole bunch of different things which were more or less related to me and my offense. And then they arrested me, of course. I was incredibly confused at that point because the speech had happened months and months ago, so I didn't even know what they were talking to me about.
But sorry, did they handcuff you at the time they arrested you?
They did not handcuff me. I had nowhere to run, so
Right.
it was fairly easy for them. I was taken to the police station in my pajamas and my Crocs. Didn't have time to get dressed or anything. And then was in the police station the whole day, essentially, until about 6 p.m. that day. So I was interrogated for a couple hours, asked a whole bunch of things about my family background, my beliefs, what I was doing in Britain. And obviously the police does this thing of first they'll try and appear as your friend. Oh, we're just here to help you. We know that you're a nice girl, that you've come here to study, you don't want to be in trouble and so on. And then later on, we'll ask you really kind of difficult questions. Do you support the extermination of all Jews and so on, which obviously no.
You were asked that question?
Yeah, questions of that nature of do you know what Hamas does and what their ideology is? You support that? Do you support the killing of all the people in Israel and the violent destruction of Israel and so on? But you have to give them nothing because everything you say, even nodding your head yes or no, will be used against you. I mean, that's what they're there for. So I ended up being released on bail. One of my conditions was to not leave the territory. Another one of my conditions was to surrender my passport. And then I was on bail. I was actually given my passport back in July 2024. I was called in for a second interview in October of 2024 because they managed to get into my devices that they had seized. And obviously, everybody has their whole life essentially on their phones and laptops. And anything potentially that you might have said can be used as support for whatever the police's interpretation of what you've done or said is. And then, so in the end, it took over a year for me to actually get charged. I was only charged in March of this year, 2025, and the day that I was charged.
So I'm sorry, the arrest then happened in the spring of 2024. Is that correct?
January 2024.
January 2024, and they
Yeah,
charged you in March.
2025.
And during this entire time, they had your devices?
Yeah. So I had to get devices of my own again. They didn't refund me or anything for the value of what they'd taken, of course not. And I still don't know what will happen to those devices at all.
Wow.
Um,
So when
yeah.
when is your trial scheduled for, or have they scheduled your trial?
Yeah, so it's scheduled for the week starting the 22nd of June, 2026. So by that point, it'll have been over, yeah, like 2 years and like 6 months since I was first arrested, and even more time since I first committed the alleged offense.
Mhm.
So it already feels like it was a while away, but by then, yeah,
Mhm.
they'll
And
basically.
so you said they give you your passport back. Does that mean you're allowed to leave the country, or you're prohibited from leaving the country?
So I was granted my passport back while I was still on conditional bail, waiting for um, charges or for them to drop the case. When I was charged, they reintroduced a bail condition that I couldn't leave the country and that I had to surrender my passport. So now my passport is back with the police. And the day that I was charged, actually, another student, a comrade of mine, was arrested while supporting me at the police station. So that's why we're the SOAS too. He was waiting outside basically for me to be done with getting charged. And while I was inside, a few police officers came outside to arrest him. Um, at the same time, 12 police officers showed up at his flat, raided his flat, seized his devices, and so on. And so he was arrested under Section 12 as well for a speech made. He's also a SOAS student like myself. He's not actually been charged yet. So we don't know exactly what the strategy of the police and the prosecution services here. They could have decided to prosecute the both of us at the same time. That's not what they've done. Um,
Mhm.
but we're fighting the case together because we know that our fates are very much intertwined in this matter, and we need to build a campaign to oppose what's yeah, been happening to us. And obviously, this other comrade is also now on bail, also has had to surrender his passport, not been able to leave the country, and so on.
So are you represented by legal counsel in this criminal proceeding?
Yeah, yeah, I've got a great team of lawyers around me. It's actually really important, I think, to have a political lawyer on your side. So I've made it important. I mean, I've made it clear to my lawyers that I'm going to fight this case politically, and I'm going to speak about my case, and I'm going to make sure there's protests outside the court whenever I've got a hearing, and they've been supportive of that. I mean, I think that's incredibly important, right? Is how could a lawyer possibly try and take on this case without understanding the politics behind it and understanding the forces at play, which is not actually just, these prosecutors trying to prove that I supported Hamas and Hamas is a terrorist organization. It's a struggle between a state which is racist, imperialist, which wants to delegitimize and prescribe resistance, and people who are challenging that.
Now, you may not be willing to answer this question, but I'm curious to know how you are bearing the financial burden of defending this criminal proceeding.
Oh, I can answer it very easily. Is that I don't pay anything. Because I'm a student, I've been eligible for legal aid here in Britain, and because my case is being dealt with in the Crown Court, they give out more aid. I'm honestly, I'm not entirely sure how it works, but I've not paid anything essentially. So this is all on the taxpayers' dime, which I think should make people even more angry. I mean, this is how probably, if you count all the different cases of people being prosecuted for Palestine solidarity work, I mean, that's probably got to be, by this point, millions of British pounds, which have been used to finance the state doing this when it could be used for much more productive ends.
So you were charged, or you were arrested, I should say, in January of last year.
Yeah.
At that time, the Conservatives were still in power. So this clown, Keir Starmer, wins the general election in, I think it was the summer of 2024.
Yeah.
It doesn't sound like there's been any change whatsoever in the posture of the prosecution since the Starmer regime came to power. What do you think this and other aspects of Starmer's policies towards Palestine says about the Labour Party today?
Yeah, I mean, I never had any hope that Labour would be kind on me or on any part of the Palestine solidarity movement. I mean, they've been very clear, even from the start of the 20th century, about what their position is on Zionism, on Palestine. And so if you look at some of the Labour Party manifestos of the mid 20th century, they talk about the dynamic Jew versus the static Arab. They resumed arms sales to Israel in the second half of the 20th century and so on. And Keir Starmer obviously is just the kind of best expression of the Labour Party as an imperialist party, because he obviously called himself a Zionist, and proudly so. The party, despite even its membership voting to recognize the UN assessment that Israel was committing a genocide in Gaza, the party has refused to actually adopt that as part of its policy. The government has refused to actually adopt that and recognize that. And this is just what the Labour Party does. So there's been no real difference in terms of the policing of Palestine protests. If anything, I'd say it's gotten worse since the Labour Party has been in charge. They've been much more quick to get people charged, to bring them to court. It's under them that Palestine action has been prescribed. So if anything, they've been much more on top of increasing the repression than even the Tories were. But this is a general movement anyways that we've seen for years and years and years in Britain, even before this current, Palestine solidarity movement. There's been huge Kill the Bill protests and so on about bills which were trying to restrict the right to protest and the right to organize. So I think this is part of a general trend towards greater and greater restrictions on people's right to express dissent in Britain, and Labour has absolutely not broken with that whatsoever.
So the last thing I'd like to ask you about, Sarah, is this, what I kind of regard as a cruel irony of this legislation you're being prosecuted under. It's presented to the public as a tool for fighting terrorism, but at the same time, it is being used aggressively to stifle criticism of Israel. What is your understanding of the conventional definition in the West of terrorism, and do you think that word can fairly be described to Israel?
I mean, I would say that the real terrorists are the people who sit in government here, who fund arms and so on to go to Israel. I'd say it's the Israeli government, it's the IDF. I mean, these are the ones who are imposing real terror on the Palestinians. And then here in this country, on people who are fighting Zionism, fighting British imperialism, and so on. I think we need to be clear that there are already a number of laws, a bunch of legislation in place which can deal with attacks on civilians when those happen, right? If we got rid of the Terrorism Act 2000, there would not be a sudden spike in attacks on the British public because suddenly terrorism is legal. That's not the case. There's already a whole existing body of legislation. What we see is that terrorism legislation was, in this country, specifically created to repress first the Irish liberation movement, people fighting against British occupation of the 6 counties of Northern Ireland. And that's then been expanded to include a whole bunch of different organizations. It's been expanded to include greater powers. And so now, if you fight not just on behalf of the Palestinians, but on behalf of the Kurds, for example, a number of Kurdish organizations are proscribed here in Britain. Loads of Irish organizations are still proscribed. Just Muslim organizations in general, Basque organizations, Tamil organizations. This all serves to just make illegal resistance towards British imperialist interests abroad and at home. I mean, it's very clear to me that, why am I being labeled as a terrorist? It's because I spoke about the resistance. It's because I spoke about the resistance in Palestine, and a victory of the Palestinian resistance is incompatible with the victory for British imperialism. It's incompatible with imperialist plans in Gaza. It's incompatible with Tony Blair doing a colonial takeover of the Gaza Strip. Like, those things just cannot work together. And the British state is aware of this.
Well, thank you very much for joining us today, Sarah. And
Having me.
I really hope that you'll keep us apprised of the progress of this farce. Needless to say, we'll be rooting for you. So thank you again. And we're signing off today from Montreal, Canada on October 31st, 2025.
Thank you.